normally start off interviews with something as obvious as the title of the book, but The Hungry Ghosts by Shyam Selvadurai, the title is so perfect, both in context of what it means to the people in the book, but the story of the hungry ghost. And I'm hoping you can share that Buddhist tale with our viewers.
Well, in Buddhist mythology, if you are a very greedy person in your human life, or if you desire too much in your human life,
and not just money, but
not just love, affection, whatever, you're born as a hungry ghost. And a hungry ghost is described as a being who has a mouth that's the size of an eye of a needle and an enormous belly. So it can never feed its hunger. And I think it's such a great symbol for human desire, because no matter how much we have, we always want more, and we can never feed our hunger, as is the problem for the characters in the book.
And for all the generations and it plays out in so many different ways, but in so many heartbreaking ways for this family. And the idea of karma as well. And I think a lot of people recognize the word karma in terms of rebirth, but it's also karma that's passed on through the generations as well.
I thought that in traditional stories, Buddhist stories, it is passed down from one birth to the next. So you're reborn carrying your karma with you into your next birth. But I think also families pass on karma, and sometimes karma passes from one person to the other person in these Buddhist stories, which really fascinated me, but I think is also true of life in a way. So I was very curious about that, and the idea of when you come to another country, or in this case when you come to Canada, it's a new life, right? So I wanted to kind of replicate the idea that when you come to your new life, you're still carrying the karma of your previous birth from your old country.
Well, the idea of carrying the baggage from your past, from your parents' past, from your grandparents' past, is a common theme in literature. And this book takes place in Sri Lanka and Canada, but and there's some things that are very traditionally Sri Lankan in it, but it really transcends that culture. I mean, it's something that I think most generations, most families, no matter where you're from, can relate to, that idea of the karma and the baggage carrying through the generations.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think also I think the other thing that I think Canadians could really relate to would be the immigration aspect, because we are all immigrants on some level. And I was trying to get at both the trauma of migration, and then the terror of the weather, which is something that we just don't think about very much. But when you're coming from another place, especially the tropics, into a Canadian environment, it's very frightening. It's the weather is a very frightening element. It's so overwhelming. It's so grand.
I mean, especially here in Winnipeg with our extremes, our 40 plus in the summer and minus 40 in the winter. But you've done a fabulous job of describing what it's like, especially for someone from the tropics, coming to a suburb like Scarborough, where this family moves to. It was rather depressing reading your description of the suburbs, but dead on. Just that endless gray, sprawling, the way you described York University as well, with that kind of 70s building, which Winnipeg has a lot of, with all little tiny slits for windows, and it feels very institutional. And that had to have been really hard for a lot of families moving here for good reason and hoping for a good new life, but having to deal with a lot of that barren ugliness.
Yeah, I think when you're coming from, say, a country like Sri Lanka, where you have a lot of street life, and you just go to the top of the road, and there's your banana seller, and he's been your banana seller since you were a child, so he knows exactly what you want, he knows where you are, he can direct people to your house. And then you come to, say, a suburb of Canada, any of the suburbs really, and then there's no people on the road, and you have to walk quite a distance to get to a mall, or quite a distance to get to the bus stop, because most people are driving, and you can't afford a car. So you have this kind of sense of being in this vast no man's land, this kind of barren landscape. But over time you get used to it, and over time it becomes home. I mean, my parents still live in that suburb, and I love to go back to it now, because going back to it is going back now to my parents' home. And I'm sure that when they pass on, I'll miss them most when I pass that suburb, not in Sri Lanka, because so you do make a life yourself, as the mother does. I mean, she makes a life for herself in that suburb, and she's very proud of the life she's made for herself, because it came hard.
Yes, and that the outer geography is kind of matches the inner geography of these characters. And I don't want to give anything away. I absolutely love this book, and it touched. It's, you know how books come into your life at a certain time. There's a lot of the plot points and the characters that really spoke to me as I was reading this. But to give our viewers a little bit of an idea of the storyline, we've got a family, a grandmother who is. Has her own demons, her own ghosts that she's dealing with. She's rich in Sri Lanka, owns a lot of property. She has a horrible relationship with her daughter, but wants a relationship with her grandson, and that's the main character of the book. But there's just so much damage that's already been done in this family that they just can't seem to escape that and come up with healthy connections.
Well, I think that's true for many families that have been damaged by history or both personal and political history, and it's just really hard to overcome that. And that's why Buddhism is interesting, because it does provide, I think, a way to step beyond your history, as the characters do discover in the novel, that there is a way to step beyond it. The grandmother is just, a force to reckon with.
Yes.
She's like a lot of grandmothers that I grew up with, and they were all business women. They didn't really think they had to be the idea of house or home extended beyond the home to, running the estates and buying houses and managing their husbands' careers. I mean, my grandfather was a doctor, and he had to give her his pay packet at the end of every month, and then she would give him a little bit of an allowance periodically, which he had to beg for, but the rest she kept locked up in her cupboard. So
the idea of the grandmother is managing businesses. She also tries to manage the family, and I think that's one of the lessons of The Hungry Ghost, is to have this ravenous desire to have your family be doing exactly what you want them to do, and not accepting them for who they are can cause so much damage. Treating them like chess pieces that you move around and trying to get them to do what you want and managing them, and the fallout from that is huge in this book.
It's true, but also she loves him, she adores him, and her problem is that she loves with that singularity with which the unloved do love. And that is the problem. Her love strangles him. And Shivan himself then takes that kind of idea of love, of how one loves, into his adult life, which is also, he is a flaw in a way.
It is interesting that there's so many books that strike me as a bit unrealistic in how easily people are able to deal with their past, and how and Shivan in this book is frustrating, because there's so many times where he's just self-destructive, and a lot of the characters are, and you're just reading the book going, no, why did you say that? Why did you do that? But in real life, unlike in books where everybody has a happy ending, we are flawed, and it is frustrating to see someone you love hurting themselves over and over again and doing self-destructive things without even realizing it.
Yes, it's very much like that. Somebody said to me, it's like you're reading the book and you're going, don't open that door, don't open that door. Oh, he opened that door. And it's true for, I think that's just the way people are in real life, but I also think in fiction, I certainly love reading fiction where you feel you've gone to a very dark place before you have the catharsis. And I think that's very classical. I mean, that's sort of what the Greeks really believed in, that you have to actually travel with the piece of art, whether it's theater or in Marquis novels, to that dark place and to really be in the darkness before you can come up to light. And that coming up, that the whole journey is in a way exhilarating, as opposed to pathos, which is kind of very surface, and which I think is the problem with a lot of books, sort of that sort of seem to indicate, as you said, that it's easy to deal with this stuff, but it isn't easy, and you have to acknowledge the difficulty of dealing with it before you can pass through it.
And in the idea of karmic rebirth as well. And one of the other legends you talk about in here, and I love this, it's really made me stop and think, it's the one about the hawk who manages to get a big piece of steak or meat, huge. He's quite proud of it and he's going to eat it, but all the other hawks are attacking him. And so eventually he ends up having to drop the meat, but he refuses to drop it for the longest time, no matter how, they're poking his eyes out, scrapping at him, and he's so damaged and he ends up dropping it. And the things that we try to hold on to, no matter how much they damage us, is incredible, and you've captured that so well in here.
I know, I love that story because it was such a sort of simple but pithy way of talking about how much damage we do to ourselves by hanging on to something. We hang on to it no matter how everything is battering at us, and we're really punishing ourselves by hanging on. And then so finally when we let it go, it's sort of this feeling of relief. So you can lift
Yes.
upwards from it, but at the same time, you're lifting upwards now, kind of battered and bruised
Yes.
from your clinging on to stuff.
And finally, I do want to ask a bit about the Sri Lankan history in here, because as I've said, this book transcends it in that everybody can relate to it. But the fighting and the history and the politics of the book is important as well.
Yes, it's very important. I mean, it's a sort of a history of a civil conflict between these two communities, the majority and the minority. That just like the conflicts, the family conflicts in the novel is cyclical. You know, they keep trying to get out of it, but they can't get out of it, and they keep getting trapped in it. And I think this is, unfortunately, even though the war is over, the conflict continues between the two communities. Neither side able to do the right thing, so to speak, and let go.
Well, thank you very much. As I said, I really enjoyed this book, and there were so many moments where I actually had to stop and just kind of pause and think about what I was reading and deal with my frustration with the main character who just took him so long to learn any lessons. But beautiful book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.